Hello and welcome to Noise in Brief, the podcast series from PRWeek. I'm Siobhan Holt, the news editor of PRWeek UK, and your host today. I'm joined by PRWeek editor John Harrington and reporter Evie Barrett. Hi team.
Hi Siobhan.
But before we begin today's podcast, I'd like to mention PR360, which is PRWeek's biggest conference of the year. It's happening in Brighton on the 8th and 9th of May. Check out the events section of the PRWeek website for more info and to book. So, we are recording this before Influencer 360, and Evie, you're going to be presenting tomorrow. How are you feeling about that? You looking forward to it?
Yeah, I am looking forward to it. I think looking at the agenda, there's a lot of, quite a wide range of panels actually, so probably looking forward to hearing other panels rather than hosting my own. That's a bit daunting. But
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it'll be a good day.
Oh no, you'll be brilliant. You'll be brilliant. Are you looking forward to it, John?
I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it. It's we've decoupled it from PR360 this year. Mm-hmm. This one's in London. It's at the Ham Yard Hotel, which
Fancy.
is a venue I like very much. It's in the middle of Soho, so good location. Yeah, always a lot to learn at these things, I find.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
and we've got a really good lineup, as Evie says, so should
Fantastic.
be well attended, we're hoping. So let's begin then. So we've got some positive news.
Who'd have thought it?
I know.
Yeah.
So it's from PR-Week's monthly trading tracker. Can you tell us a bit more, John?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, a bit of background, the Top 150 monthly trading tracker is where we survey UK PR agencies on trading in the past month. And we ask questions like, was trading better than expected or worse? Are clients being more demanding? Do you expect to reach your financial targets? That sort of thing. So I'm happy to say that things appear to be looking up. We know that a few months ago things were a bit difficult, but there seems to be a bit of a turnaround actually. 2 in 3 agencies for the most recent survey, which related to March, found trading that month to be better than expected. That compares to just over 40% when we asked the question 1 month earlier in relation to February. And 87% of agencies are confident of reaching their UK growth targets for their current financial year. And this kind of feeling was reflected in comments from the agency bosses too, because they all have a chance to add their comments. I'll just pick out one or two. Nina Webb at Brazen called March an action-packed month, with the agency, quote, boosted by a significant new business win. Stephanie Forrest of the agency Think Feel Do said March was, quote, our best month ever in both revenue and profit terms. I should probably say it wasn't universally upbeat. Some agency bosses spoke about a sluggishness around consumer briefs, for example, smaller budgets and indecision still being a problem. So, you know, I shouldn't over-egg this pudding, but as I mentioned, last year was quite tough for many agencies. So things do seem, on the face of it, touch wood, have turned some kind of corner, we hope. So what's your sense, Evie and Siobhan, about how things have been faring in the last couple of months?
I would agree anecdotally. That's sort of the general vibe I've been getting from people, that they're all very busy. There's a lot of pitches going around. Would you agree, Evie?
Yeah, definitely. I think a few people in the trading tracker called it March Madness, kind of a lot of activity. James Hickman at Hatch said that it's a more buoyant market, but he used the word frantic to describe it, which I probably think is quite accurate. It's sort of, there's a lot of activity, but people aren't sort of relaxed. There's still a lot of pressure, obviously, to achieve, and there's still kind of some tension, I think, where it's been difficult in recent months. Mm.
It's a good point, isn't it? I think just because there's a lot of activity doesn't necessarily mean it's all positive. It might be that actually the pitches that have come up are worth less than the ones that they had before. So they're basically downsizing effectively the clients. So it might be that they're looking to get new agencies that are happy with those different briefs, and they might be smaller briefs. So that is a caveat that's worth putting, I think. And you make the point that, you know, there's still a lot of people out there who are really keen to make sure they hit their budgets. So it might be that as we come towards the end of the financial year and a lot of agencies' financial years, that becomes, as you say, a slightly more frantic situation.
It does seem like there's less long-term retained work. Like an agency might win a project that lasts a few months or so, but it's not necessarily stable income throughout the year. And I think where agencies are retained, a lot of the time clients are leaning on them quite heavily, kind of as an extension of their team, and really requiring a lot from them, kind of making them work for their money. So
yeah, it's going to be really interesting. So next month, obviously, we've got the Top 150 launching, and so many of these issues will be looked at in more depth there. So anyone listening to this, definitely pay close attention in May, because we're going to be giving a lot of data on this, and you know, we've all been sort of crunching the numbers recently, so watch this space. But yeah, I do think there's this general sense that as the weather improves, touch wood, maybe that's not the best analogy to use, actually, given the fact it's raining today and 9 degrees. But, there does seem to be a slightly sunnier outlook.
Okay, so next up, the Scottish Government is in the news this week for its comms and PR bills. Who wants to explain what's been happening there?
Yeah, so communications has become a political football north of the border. Scottish Labour has attacked the Scottish Government for its communications bill for health and social care. It came to around 1.9 million for 2023-2024. Labour accused SNP ministers of going for, quote, headlines before healthcare. Scottish Labour's health spokeswoman, Dame Jackie Bailey, said the figure could be used to recruit 64 nurses. So it's not the first time by any means we've seen this kind of accusation about public money being spent in our industry, and it won't be the last, I'm sure. I think it's a reminder, really, of the lack of understanding many people in the media and in society in general have about what communications professionals do. Inevitably, the article in the Scottish Daily Express referred to them as, quote, spin doctors. Ironically, around the same time, there was a press release from NHS England highlighting exactly what kind of impact comms can have on healthcare. Apparently, the MMR catch-up campaign encouraging people to get their MMR vaccine saw sign-ups increase by a quarter in the first 3 months of this year compared to the same period last year. So there's a real kind of concrete evidence of the value that communications can have in terms of improving healthcare and making people healthier. So, yeah, clearly a lot to talk about here. I mean, what did you both make of this? I mean, do you think Scottish Labour's got any kind of point here, or does it show the industry has a real job to do still selling its value, would you say?
In terms of the point that Scottish Labour's making, I mean, I can't claim to be an expert in PR budgets and kind of how far 1.9 million should stretch, but I think the key point is kind of onlookers misunderstanding what that budget does. I think people assume that PR is there to just make the NHS look good, but the money's going towards a lot more than just reputation management. The phrase spin doctor is obviously misleading, and it doesn't help because people just associate it with propaganda and things like that, whereas the comms team is obviously working to educate people on their own health and raise awareness of issues with the kind of overall goal of helping people. So I think critics should probably be mindful of that.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a problem with sometimes journalists that write about this. For a lot of journalists, I think PR is synonymous with media relations. And the more cynical journalists might associate that with spin, inverted commas. Whereas, as we know, comms is so much more than that. So I do think there's that sort of disconnect, perhaps. What do you think, Siobhan?
Yes, so when you look at that amount of money, I think it's going to look a bit shocking to the general public because it's a large amount of money. And as you say, they're not seeing the worth of that. And the story also included that you could pay for a number of nurses as well. And I think in a cost of living crisis that we're still experiencing and the current situation with the NHS, that story is just going to appeal to readers' fear.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I think it slightly falls into the area that comms has the issue with, which is how does it prove its worth? How does it demonstrate its value? And I'm going to slightly shift tact and say that maybe programs like Netflix Scoop might actually help comms industry. For those that don't know, there's been a recent drama on Netflix which has dramatised the interview that Newsnight did with Prince Andrew. But in it really demonstrates the behind the scenes and the comms work that was involved and where it failed. And it showed that on screen. And I think things like that might help the comms industry and the PR sector and really show its value.
Although I guess in a way it's difficult, isn't it? Because most people would see that as a comms disaster.
Yes, they do. But I think with the crisis expert that, maybe if they'd listened to him, they might not have had the same result. It's hard to know, but it slightly demonstrated that there were other ways that it could have gone and it might have worked more in the favour. Who knows?
It's one of those things where you don't know what you've got until it's gone. And I think the fact that Prince Andrew obviously listened to his private secretary so much and really worked with her instead of a comms person kind of shows the importance of having someone from a PR background to kind of provide that outside perspective. Because I think if you're working so closely with someone, I guess it can happen with a PR person too, if they get too close to kind of their client or something, then you can just end up kind of being in an echo chamber. Yeah, it shows the importance of bringing in outside PR support at times of crisis.
I mean, you can't sort of underestimate the importance of that, and the sort of the outside perspective is so important. You know, you don't really want people who are yes men or drinking the Kool-Aid, do you?
No.
We were talking early on in our meeting about how it's not unusual to have like the top comms people at football clubs to not be supporters of those football clubs, of that football club. Which sounds odd in one way, but actually I think you do need someone who's a bit dispassionate and can just take a real kind of a long view of things and to look at all the different elements to it and not be sort of swayed by, you know, bias and allegiance and that sort of thing.
And I think it works in politics as well. You've got to have maybe that alternative view that's going to give you, you know, especially if you're trying to get a section of society on your side that maybe you're struggling to appeal to, having someone with that opposing view is really going to help. Yeah,
I think that's true. I guess the question is, do you think the PR industry can ever win this? Do you think they can ever get, well, the national media, I guess, or the general public not to have this perception? Or do you think this is something that's just always going to be there? While, you know, PR exists behind the scenes, will people always have this interpretation of it?
I think if we continue this trend of sort of docudramas portraying recent events, it could really help, because we saw obviously with the Mr. Bates versus the Post Office ITV series that people really understood the crux of the issue once they'd seen that. And although there weren't necessarily PR people portrayed in that, I think the more that recent events are dramatised with PR people involved, then the general public will kind of get a better sense of what they're actually doing and the role they play.
And I think dramas are the way to go forward. I mean, John, you and I grew up watching how many comedies that involved comms departments, whether that be W1A or...
Well, this is it. They're all negative, weren't they?
I mean, it was
ab-fab. It was ab-fab, or it was, you know, the thick of it.
Yes.
So there were the two kind of extremes, sort of negative, pejorative kind of interpretations.
And you
of
sometimes
the industry.
reference Siobhan from W1A, and
not in reference to you.
Not in reference to me.
No, but she is just partly the fact that's just a really, really funny comedy character.
She's brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
But I mean, it is an issue, isn't it? Particularly, you know, in a wider sense, the industry wants to attract good people into the sector, and if loads of people don't know what it is, then
how do you do that?
It causes a really big problem. So, definitely one challenge for the industry overall, I think.
Next up, we're going to discuss the results from Brazen PR's Mind the Gap report, which asked if it was time for brand marketeers to burst the London PR bubble. The agency, which is based in Manchester, and incidentally won PRWeek's Best Agency Outside of London award last year, surveyed 251 PR professionals and 251 senior in-house brand marketeers across the UK. Obviously, I'm slightly biased being from Greater Manchester, but when I read it, for me, what stood out was that 1 in 3 London-based PR pros couldn't correctly answer that the Bullring is in Birmingham, and more than half didn't know that Co-op Live, which is due to open in Manchester this month, coincidentally, will be the UK's biggest indoor arena. For me, I found these stats quite shocking, but what did you guys think of the report's findings? Evie, let's start with you. What did you think?
Yeah, I do think it's shocking. I think if you're working in PR, even if you're working in London, realistically, all your clients aren't going to be serving London-based communities exclusively. So you kind of need to have a strong general knowledge of all the regions of the UK or wherever it is that you're operating in order to cater to those audiences effectively. I mean, I think it's quite telling that 40% of PR pros aged 18 to 24 have rarely or never been north of Birmingham for work or social reasons. I think travelling is a good start to at least grasping what other places are like and how to communicate to people in those areas. I also thought it was interesting that 1 in 5 London PR pros are considered Nepo workers. The report said that they got their first job in PR through a friend or family member and, quote, just ran with it, which I think is quite concerning because it doesn't paint a picture of sort of passionate, engaged people who are wanting to kind of go out and really serve the communities that they're working with.
But could we argue then, though, that I'm going to take the opposite view here, that maybe that age bracket, we've had COVID, so they've obviously been working from home, that's very limited. To travel requires money. Yeah. And so maybe there's an element of that for some, they can't be travelling up to Birmingham, Glasgow, Cardiff, every other weekend. That, it's just as expensive as it is to go abroad in some cities.
Yeah, I do. I've got a lot of sympathy with the survey. I do sometimes think that, let's say, if the PR industry was based in Manchester, you'd still have the same problem?
Would you have that problem?
Because,
yeah.
it'd be like to people from Manchester, do you know what it's like to live in Kent? Or do you know what it's like to live in Norfolk? I don't know. It would be the same thing probably, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So I've said it for a while, I think sort of structurally the industry needs to move out of London, spread its wings more and take advantage of like the talent in all kind of parts of the country. But it's something that the sector's been talking about for years and years.
Yeah, I think for me as well, what I found surprising was that the results also showed that 10% of London-based PR pros can only name key media that operate within the capital. And Brazen said that they found that worrying, especially for national clients. And I slightly agree with that surely that's some of the basics you'd hope for some PRs.
Yeah. I guess if you're doing media relations, you probably would, though. If you were doing media relations, London-based agency, and you wanted to, sort of get more publicity in, say, Manchester, presumably if you were in that role, you would know.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I guess I'm like slightly concerned about the sort of all those sort of kind of Nepo London sort of ignoramuses who don't know anything outside of Watford or whatever. I think there's a slight danger of stereotyping people in and around London.
Yes.
To be honest.
Yeah. And I say that as someone, that can go the other way as well. We just don't want to be doing any of the stereotyping.
No, we don't. And London has got a population the size of a sort of small country in Europe.
True.
So it's sort of, I think in another sense, it is difficult to compare London to anywhere else in the UK. So yeah, I guess that's a slight caveat I've got. But I think the general point remains that, it does show that the industry needs to continue to sort of spread its wings and make sure it attracts people from, all over the country and beyond. But it's a challenge, isn't it?
It is.
I don't know if you saw the response on LinkedIn to this report, but a lot of people were kind of focusing on the relationship between clients and agencies outside of London, agencies in London. People were saying that a lot of clients think choosing an agency outside of London is more of a risk, or they're seen as a bit of a wild card. It kind of puts agencies outside of London at a disadvantage. There was one comment, Vicky Rogerson of North PR said she'd witnessed Northern clients become, quote, starstruck by flashy London PR agencies who ultimately overcharged them and underdelivered. I mean, obviously that's not going to be the case all the time, but I think maybe there's a job to do in educating clients that they don't need a London agency to kind of get them coverage and things like that as well.
Yeah, necessarily. I mean, I think, there is also the element of this comes from agencies outside of London. So the element of they would say that, wouldn't they, is kind of, we should probably add that caveat. But yeah, and I'm sure, there's sort of great agencies and less good agencies in every part of the country. But yeah, I do think it's a big challenge.
That's it for this week's podcast. Thanks to John and Evie for your thoughts and insights on this week's episode. But before we go, I'd quickly like to plug the PRWeek UK Awards. That's our biggest awards event of the year, so don't miss out. Get your entries in today. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, then we'd really appreciate it if you could please leave a review wherever you access PRWeek's podcasts. Noise and Brief goes live every 2 weeks, but look out for our longer interview-based podcast, Beyond the Noise, which comes out next week. Thank you for listening. Until next time, bye for now.